Today's message is especially for those that need encouragement, that need strength in battle, and I'm speaking about spiritual battle, of course. And it's really a word of hope, and I think we all need it in these days. And it's surprisingly, because we are continuing in Zechariah, and I want to go to chapter 10. But chapter 10 you can read in different ways, actually, as all scripture. You can read it simply for what it says, as more or less historical information with maybe some encouragement for the Israelites in those days. But we can also read it as a kind of manual for spiritual warfare. And it's very interesting that we can see these both layers. And I want to look more at this second layer of spiritual battle. We can divide it in a few sections, which I want to do, showing how God acts. And the first thing is that He answers. The second thing is that He provides. The third thing is that He gathers. And the fourth thing is that He blesses. And these are the four things that I want to split this chapter in. And so the first thing is how God answers. And for that we read the first 4 verses of Zechariah 10. Ask ye of the Lord rain in time of the latter rain. So the Lord shall make bright clouds and give them showers of rain to every one grass in the field. For the idols have spoken vanity, and the diviners have seen a lie, and have told false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore they went their way as a flock. They were troubled, because there was no shepherd. Mine anger was kindled against the shepherds, and I punished the goats. For the Lord of hosts had visited his flock, the house of Judah, and had made them as a goodly horse in the battle. Out of him came forth the corner, out of him the nail, out of him the battle bow, and out of him every oppressor together. Okay, the very first thing is one of the most important words of the whole chapter, the first word. And the first word is a verb, and this means, as I've said many times, this points to something you have to do. And what does it say? Ask. Ask. Our request will set things in motion. God is gentle, but He's also like a gentleman. He will not impose Himself against our will. Once we ask, things are set in motion. Our request is very important. So that's where it begins. And as James writes, you have not because you ask not. And Jesus Himself says in John 14, if you ask, I will do it. And of course there's a context and there's conditions. I don't want to go into that too much, but the point is that our request sets things in motion. And here we see that God says, ask of the Lord rain. Ask rain. And what do you get? Showers. Rain can be very gentle, a few drops, but showers, it's obvious, that's a lot. And that's why I chose this song before, Showers of Blessing. Raindrops are falling, but showers we want. So you ask, and God will give. Not just what you ask, He gives what you need. And this only He knows. And if we think of rain and of clouds and showers, then for the natural man this is all laws of nature. Water vaporizes, it condenses in the higher, colder air, and the cohesion between the drops makes them go together and become bigger drops, and then air pressure and gravity and all this will cause at some point that it rains and it falls down again. It's all explainable, laws of nature, nothing special. However, They are God-given. They are not just laws of nature. And the Bible is very clear of that. If God says ask for rain, that means that it's up to Him to give it. And for example, in Psalm 104, and there are many examples by the way, but in Psalm 104 verse 13 through 15 it says, He, that's God, He watereth the hills from His chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, and the herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth, and wine that maketh glad the heart of man, and oil to make his face to shine, and bread which strengtheneth man's heart. So God gives all these blessings. These are blessings from God. If God stops it from raining, none of these things are being produced. All these blessings fade away. Psalm 65 verses 9 through 11 say a similar thing. Thou visitest the earth, and waterest it. Thou greatly enrichest it with the river of God, which is full of water. Thou preparest them corn, then when thou hast so provided for it. Thou waterest the ridges thereof abundantly. Thou settlest the furrows thereof. Thou makest it soft with showers. Thou blessest the springing thereof. Thou crownest the earth, the year with thy goodness, and thy paths drop fatness. These are all gifts and blessings from God. They are God's laws, not nature's laws. Nature is made by God, and so God can change these laws as He wishes. If, for example, we look in the Bible in Genesis 2, before the flood, you see there was no rain. Until the flood it had not rained, so there were different laws in play back then. It's the same earth, but God can set the rules, and back then it didn't rain. And so in other times, during Elijah's time, for example, we saw that God made it stop from raining for 3.5 years. And even in Isaiah he foretells that when the Israelites would be scattered among the nations, He will also make the rain stop in the land of Israel, which we know happened. It hadn't rained there for hundreds of years, or hardly anyway, not enough to bring forth any fruit. So God is in control of these laws. He dictates what happens. God created nature and He presides over it. And that is important to recognize, because therefore we depend 100% upon God, not upon nature or how we manipulate it, but we depend on God. And that is certainly also true spiritually. God answers through prayers. He says, ask rain. So rain, you can replace it with blessings, with your needs. As we saw from these verses from Psalms, rain produces all these things that we need to take care of ourselves, to nurture ourselves, etc. So these are blessings. We have to ask for them. Ask and you shall be given. That is the principle. And here it speaks even about the latter rain. The latter rain is the rain which falls early in spring. We have maybe the mindset, Western mindset, is that latter rain is late in the year, somewhere in November or something. But it's actually early in the year, but it is latter because it's the last rain before the harvest. And that's very important rain, because that's the rain that makes the fruit grow to its fullness. And that's what you need shortly before you harvest. So even after this long period of growth, and think again spiritually, when you go maybe through a long process and you think this is about it, even then God gives abundant latter rain so that you may be able to produce fruit. And actually it's necessary in order to yield fruit. God then gives right away a warning, because He continues in this second verse to speak about idols and diviners, false prophets, and false shepherds also. Why does he do that? He says, ask me, basically what he says. If you ask others, it will have dire consequences. These idols that you ask, they cannot give you anything. And the word here, the Hebrew word for idols, refers to house idols. These were the little statues that people had in their houses, to which they prayed, which they worshipped. These idols, they cannot give anything, nor the diviners, these false prophets. They have seen a lie and told fake dreams or false dreams, it says here. And this happens a lot. And I just want to read a few verses from Jeremiah, because it speaks there in chapter 23 specifically about this. Verses 25 through 26. I have heard what the prophet said, that prophesy lies in my name, saying, I have dreamed. How long shall this be in the heart of the prophets that prophesy lies? Yeah, they are prophets of the deceit of their own heart. Behold, I am against them that prophesy false dreams, saith the Lord, and do tell them and cause my people to err by their lies and their lightness. Yet I sent them not, nor commanded them. Therefore they shall not profit this people at all, saith the Lord. So God is against this. They use God's name, but actually these dreams and all these ideas, they come from their own hearts. And you need only to go to the internet and type in prophetic dreams, and you will get thousands of results of people who have all kinds of dreams and visions and things, and they all claim it's from the Lord, but it appears easily, actually, you can discern that most of it, if not all, is not from the Lord at all. God is against this. He has given his word, and we need not to come up with new things. False prophets and false shepherds, they are not feeding and leading the flock, but they are actually doing the opposite. They are starving and scattering the flock. That is what he says. The people are like a flock, and they are troubled because there's no shepherd. They are not protecting the flock against the dangers from outside, but they are actually exposing it to the dangers. They are leading it exactly into the claws of the wolves. God's anger is kindled against these shepherds, and against also, he says, the goats that knowingly follow them, because there are many also that they want to hear these false dreams, even though they might somewhere in the back of their mind know that they are not the truth, but they are what they want to hear, and so they keep following them. So when we ask God, it's the only one we should ask, and it's also the only one we should listen to, not to dreams, visions, lies and deceit that others bring and actually keep us away from God. Stay aimed at God. Ask him, he's the one who provides. And that's what it continues then. He is the one who provides also the true shepherd. Out of Judah, it says. We know who this Lion of Judah is, but he gives some clues here that are very specific. And here you see the prophetic power again, that in the words of Zechariah. The corner, it says. You could also fill in there the cornerstone. We know who the cornerstone is. Of course, it speaks about Jesus, but the cornerstone is what gives stability to the building. And then he says the nail. What is the nail? The word here, the Hebrew word is vav. And the Hebrew word vav is written with 2 times the letter vav. And that word, vav, it's a letter, but it's also a word. The word means tent peg. Specifically, it's used for tent peg. And a tent peg holds up the tent. You can have a beautiful tent, but without cords and tent pegs, it will just fall apart. It will not stay. So like the cornerstone gives stability to the house, the tent peg gives stability to the tent or the tabernacle. And then in addition to this support and stability that God provides, He also provides weapons. That's the next thing that's mentioned here. The battle bow and the oppressor or ruler, the leader, the true leader. So here it speaks about weaponry and leadership in battle. And this pertains specifically to spiritual battle, because our fight is not against flesh and blood. So God provides these weapons that we need so much. He supports us, He upholds us, but then He also gives us weaponry, because we cannot escape the battle. We are in it, and we have to stand our ground. And we can only do it with the weaponry that He provides. But it begins with this: ask. So if we don't ask, we are in trouble from the get-go. And of course, if we read other scriptures, we know that in order to ask, there are certain conditions. Always think of this when it's very hot outside now, and when a child is walking in the street with his parents, and this child wants maybe an ice cream, he doesn't go to anyone walking there and say, "Hey, give me an ice cream." He will ask his own father or mother, "Can I have an ice cream?" And so the same with us. When we ask our Father, which means He has to be our Father. We have to be His child. So this is, of course, the condition that must be set first. Now, if we ask, God provides. In the spiritual battle, God provides victory. Victory. And that is what we read in the next verses, verse 5 through 7. "And they shall be as mighty men, which tread down their enemies in the mire of the streets, in the battle. And they shall fight, because the Lord is with them. And the riders on the horses shall be confounded. And I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph, and I will bring them again to place them, for I have mercy upon them, and they shall be as though I had not cast them off. For I am the Lord their God, and will hear them. And they of Ephraim shall be like mighty men, and their heart shall rejoice as through wine. Yea, their children shall see it, and be glad. Their heart shall rejoice in the Lord." Now here you read victorious words. It's really beautiful to read, and very encouraging. And even more so, of course, again, when we apply it spiritually. What happens when we ask the Lord? There's only one way: victory. And you see that these seemingly weak sheep, they become victorious heroes. And why? It says exactly there: because the Lord is with them. And those that ride horses, they will be confounded. Now, the riders on the horses, I said it also last time, these are the warriors of those times. The mighty warriors, they were on horses. It was expensive, and so most of the soldiers were actually foot soldiers, but those on the horses, they were the leaders, and they were the mighty soldiers. And so we spoke last time about Alexander the Great, who was used by God to bring judgment. He was riding on a horse. These were the armies, but then it spoke about Jesus, who came lowly on a donkey. And here again we have the flock that are led by the true shepherd. They are sheep. They are weak sheep, you can say, but they are victorious heroes. And even those that ride horses, the seemingly mighty men, they are not mighty at all. And if you want words of victory, if you need to encourage yourself sometimes when you're in a spiritual battle, remember those words that I want to read now from Psalm 20, verses 6 through 8. Now know that that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven. with the same saving strength of his right hand. The saving strength of his right hand, by the way, it's the saving strength of God. The salvation of God in Hebrew is Yeshua. And then it mentions also the right hand. Who sits at the right hand of the throne is Jesus. So the saving strength of the right hand points to Jesus. Some trust in chariots and some in horses. But we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. So it might be so impressive to see them come with horses and chariots. And again, think spiritually. This is what the enemy does. He comes with overwhelming power, with lots of fanfare. And you think, how can I stand against this? But they are brought down and fallen. And we are risen. And all we need is not horses, chariots, and this and that. The name of the Lord. The name of the Lord. So this is the power that gives us victory. And this victory, as we see in Zechariah, has 4 characteristics. It's also important to remember, because these are things you can test. Do I experience this? And if not, then the battle needs to maybe intensify or change the strategy. First of all, it is complete. What does Zechariah say? The enemies are trodden down like mire, that's mud, in the street. They are not just defeated or chased away. They are trodden down like mud in the street. It's a complete defeat. Complete. That's the first characteristic. The second one is that it is divine. The reason that this happens, Zechariah writes, is because the Lord is with them. That's the reason. It is divine. I had to think of Gideon. Gideon is a good example of this. When we think of the time he had to go to battle, he had an army that was big, but it was still smaller than the enemies. He was overpowered in that sense. But in spite of that, God brought down his army way down to only 300 men. And this was all before the battle. So normally you would be greatly dismayed if you had to lead such a small group against the enemy. But what did God do? He brought victory. Victory in a way that only God can orchestrate, and that you see there because the Lord was with him. But then you see also how complete it was, because the armies of the enemy, they began to fight each other. But those that were left, and there were many left, they fled. So Gideon didn't say, well, that's good riddance, we won the battle, they are gone, let's go home and enjoy. No, he went after them, and he pursued them, and he had to go a long way after them. And he tried to gather people from other towns to join him, and they declined to say, it's not going to work, you're never going to make it. But he went after them, he pursued the enemy until the last one, and he got them, brought them back in, and they were killed. And so that's the complete victory that God brings. We often settle with way too less. When we see the enemy fleeing, we think, okay, done, we're good to go. But as Jesus also explained, then the house is clean and he will come back 7 times stronger. So you have to go after him and pursue him until the last man, so to speak. So that's this complete victory that can only be obtained when God is with you. Then the third thing is also very interesting, is that it gives strength. That's the opposite of what you would expect. In verse 6, Zechariah 10, God says, I will strengthen. I will strengthen. And then he says, I will save. And then he says, I will bring. So it begins all the time, I will. God is doing it. God is doing it. And that is the key, because God is doing it, we are strengthened. If we would do it, if it would be our battle, we would be exhausted. And this is unfortunately what we often do. We fight the enemy on our own volition and we get tired of it because he's playing with us, he's defeating us. Sometimes he allows us to give us, or he gives us the impression that we are winning, we are gaining, and then he comes back full force and he demoralizes us even more. And it's exhausting. But if God fights the fight, then we are actually strengthened, we are encouraged, and we come out much stronger. And that's also what this Psalm 20 says. They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. That's a whole different thing than someone who is dead tired of fighting. So it gives strength. Spiritual battle, where God brings victory, there you come out stronger than before. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is that it is extensive. It's extensive. And here the example of Ephraim is mentioned. Ephraim was at that time very weak. It was in a bad state within the tribes. They were like the worst example of Israel. They were just in a bad state. And so to use them as the example of becoming glorious as a mighty man shows that even that what was weak to begin with will become glorious. It will become mighty. And it goes even further, because this victory, because it is so complete, it will last. And that's why he says that children shall see it. In the next generation will still enjoy this victory. And it extends through time. And this is so, of course. If we just look back the last few thousand years, let's say since Jesus' days, millions have already shared in this spiritual victory through the ages and still do today. So extensive it is, but we have to see all these things spiritually, not from the flesh, obviously. So God provides victory. Victory is complete, it's divine, it gives strength, and it is extensive. The next thing that we read in Zechariah 10 is that God gathers. And that's the opposite of what we just saw before. These false prophets and false shepherds, they scatter. But God gathers. That's verse 8 through 10. I will hiss for them and gather them, for I have redeemed them, and they shall increase as they have increased. And I will sow them among the people, and they shall remember me in far countries, and they shall live with their children and turn again. I will bring them again also out of the land of Egypt, and gather them out of Assyria, and I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon, and place shall not be found for them. And he shall pass through the sea with affliction, and shall smite the waves and in the sea, and all the deeps of the river shall dry up. And the pride of Assyria shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart away. So again we see here the physical gathering of Israel and back into the land. But here too we have to look at the spiritual meaning. It's, as I said, it opposes these false shepherds and false prophets that cause division and scatter. Here we see that God puts everything back in the right place. He restores structure. And if you see it on the spiritual level, it's the same thing. What does the enemy do in your mind? He causes division. He causes chaos. He scatters your whole structure. And what does God do? He brings back everything in the right place. He puts the puzzle in the right way together, eliminates this chaos and restores health, also mental health. He gathers his sheep, his flock, not with war, not with deception, not with temptation, but that's a very beautiful picture here. He uses a still small voice, as it's written in 1 Kings 19. Here it is mentioned as a hiss, a hiss. And the word here used for hiss, the Hebrew word, it's the word that they would use for the sound that the shepherd makes to gather his sheep. He doesn't shout loud, he has a certain whistle. And every shepherd has his unique sound, and his sheep know that sound. And he just needs to whistle that particular sound, and the sheep, they come to him. And it's not a loud sound. So that is what it refers to. That's the hiss. And of course, Jesus speaks about this in John 10, verse 4. He says, "And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice." They know his voice. And it's always impressive to think about this voice. This voice. This is the same voice that we read about in Genesis 1, that speaks everything into existence. When God says, "Let there be light," there's light. Yeah? He just speaks it into existence. This same voice can speak to you and me with this small, still sound, and call you to him. The question, of course, is, do we indeed recognize this voice? As we just read in John 10, is it so that we recognize it? Because it's usually a small voice, and there is a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise around it. Do we recognize this small voice, this specific, particular voice in between all this noise that we have around us? That is the question. And as Jesus says in John 10, "My sheep know," or here's third person, his sheep know his voice. You know, this is knowledge that you get through being in a relationship. That's how you know the voice. If there is a busy mall with hundreds of people, which nowadays with all the lockdowns and distancing we don't have it so much anymore, but let's imagine a few years ago, big mall with hundreds of people, mothers with children and everything, and there is one particular mother and her child goes away in between all the people, and the child then is maybe attracted by something it sees, but then realizes, "Where is mama?" and begins to cry. In all this noise and sound, the mother hears the cry. "This is my child." How can it be that the mother recognizes this? And the other way around, probably also when the mother shouts the name of the child will also hear, "Hey, I hear mama." So when you have this relationship, which is based on this love of God, then you will know the voice. And if you don't have a relationship, you won't know the voice. You will just hear sound and noise, but you will not know what it is. And Zechariah writes that they will remember God and they will turn, it says. You can also read return. It's this word for repentance, this turning around. And they will come to him. Even, he says, from Egypt and from Assyria. Now, Egypt and Assyria, they are enemy territories. And this is interesting. Again, if you think of it spiritually, you might be full into the enemy territory in your spirit. That does not stop God from getting you out. So, there's no border there that God cannot cross. There is no customs checkpoints, there is no quarantining or PCR test or anything. There's no border for God. He can call you out of enemy territory just like that. And that's, of course, comforting. Borders do not limit God, and this is also so with spiritual borders. And he, in fact, gathers so many to him that they don't even fit in the land that he has prepared for them, because he says, I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. In other words, the borders of Israel will not be big enough to contain all of them. It will extend into Gilead, which is Jordan, and into Lebanon. And there will be more than fit in. So borders, they don't count so much for God in that respect. And then in verse 11 it alludes, of course, to the Exodus. It speaks there about the sea and the waves of the sea and the depths of the river shall dry up. So you have to think of the Exodus, because there will be a new Exodus of sorts. And just as in the Exodus, in Moses' days, the enemy was crushed in the sea. And this is the point. The river shall dry up, which means that which seems a threat and a border that seems impossible to cross, God will dry it up so that we can cross. And spiritually, same thing. There are things that we think we cannot possibly overcome, get through, but God will dry it up. It says in Exodus, when Moses and the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, they were walking on dry soil. It was dry. It was dust. It wasn't mud, because there was water before. When God does something, he does it complete. And so here it says the same. The river shall dry up. So all these barriers, they will disappear. And so you can go through. And then God will crush the enemy in it, like he crushed the Egyptians in it. And we see the same with this I would say, final exodus that is upon us, where God will also hiss in a way and call his people to him. And I'm speaking about the rapture in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 3 and 4 and verse 9. It says, or when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. Then in verse 9 it says, for God had not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by our Lord Jesus Christ. And so this is the picture of Moses and the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. Sudden destruction came upon them, the Egyptians. But the children of Israel, they went through dry path to the other side, because God had not appointed them to wrath. God will soon hiss a specific sound, the trumpet, and he will gather his flock. And so we have to be tuned to him, so that we will hear this voice, recognize this voice, and be gathered unto him. God gathers. This is his one of his characteristics. He gathers. Satan scatters. So these polar opposites. And the last thing that we find here in Zechariah 10, the last verse, is that God blesses. God blesses. Verse 12. And I will strengthen them in the Lord, and they shall walk up and down in his name, saith the Lord. I will strengthen them. Strength, if you think of strength, it's the greatest blessing that we can receive. Strength, but strength, what I'm talking about, it comes in different forms. First of all, there is physical strength. Physical strength, a good health. That's a great blessing, because when we have physical strength, when we are in a good health, we can act in this world with ease. And we can even endure difficult times, hardships, with patience, because we feel strong, we feel good. If our health is compromised, everything, even the most simple thing, becomes an ordeal. And so strength, physical strength or health, is a blessing. It's a great blessing. Then there is intellectual strength. Intellectual strength means that you can think critically. You can master problems of life. And there are many obstacles and problems that the world brings, that the enemy brings on our path. And often when we have a clear mind, we can easily come up with things to overcome them. This is also God-given. It's not that we rule out God and do it on our own strength. It is God-given. It's a blessing of God that we will be able to do so. Also, a thing of intellectual strength is that we have understanding of things. And understanding drives also out doubt. People can doubt about many things because they are not certain. And so intellectual strengths give you understanding, and that drives out doubt, and thus leaves you with security. And the third one I want to mention is moral strength. Moral strength, which means the ability to resist that which is wrong and to pursue that which is right. And of course, this must be based on God's moral law. But this is also a great blessing, moral strength. If you don't have that, then you're very easily swayed to things that are wrong, things that are against God, things that the enemy brings on your way, temptations that he puts on your path. And if your moral strength is low, if you're morally weak, you will give in to them, and that will separate you from God and bring you into problems. So spiritual victory results in strength in the Lord. Now before we had read that God says, I will strengthen them. So he will give strength in the battle, but then when you come out, or even when you're still in, he also gives this strength that is a result of this. And again, that is what we read in Psalm 20. They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand up. We come out stronger. And it says then in Zechariah 10 verse 12, and they shall walk up and down in the Lord. Up and down. If you think of the road of life, the path of life has many ups and downs. It's different for everyone, of course. But in his name, and that's what it says here, in his name we can walk upright. Just as Psalm 20 also said, we stand upright, we can walk upright, and we can walk in peace even in times of trouble. When we look around us in the world, we see that many people, most people, I have to say, they walk not in God's name. They walk in the name of pleasure, in the name of greed, in the name of ambition, in many names, and all these lead to the same place. They lead to death. And so the only right way to walk is walk in the name of the Lord. God's promises, if you read them here, they are massive. But we must walk in them. We must ask, and we must also walk in them. And again, I would say, read this chapter again with the spiritual warfare in mind, and you see how many things God promises here in this chapter. And it's enormous. And so we must embrace this and give the enemy no space whatsoever. Focus on God. Be in this relationship with him so that we can indeed recognize this still small voice whenever he hisses for us. In the midst of all this noise of the world, and this noise that the enemy brings on our radar. if we are focusing on God and on His voice, then we shall indeed walk up and down in His name with strength. So I want to finish with a verse from Micah, chapter 4, verse 5. And again, all this, see it from the perspective of spiritual warfare. Micah 4, verse 5. For all people will walk everyone in the name of his God. And we will walk in the name of the Lord, our God, forever and ever. Amen.